Hi there, I'm Scott Lowe with Actual Tech Media, and thank you for joining us for today's event. This event is entitled Breaking the Multi-Factor Authentication Myth, How Hackers Are Bypassing Multi-Factor Authentication with Astonishing Accuracy, in episode 4 of our Phish Stories with SlashNEXT. We'll be introducing the two gentlemen you see on your screen in just a second. But before we do that, I want to make sure we take care of some housekeeping. Again, we'll do some introductions shortly. I'm Scott Lowe with Actual Tech Media. We also want to make sure you have an opportunity to ask lots of questions of us during today's event. We have two expert speakers here to talk to us about multi-factor authentication, its importance, and how it can be compromised, and some things you need to know to make sure that you don't fall victim to an increasingly common attack. So if you have questions, ask them, and it could be worth $50, and I'll talk about that in just a second. SlashNEXT has also made a number of handouts available in the Handouts tab in your console. It's on the same button as the Q&A. Just take a look at the Handouts tab there. But make sure you use that Q&A button liberally to ask questions and take a look at the handouts that SlashNEXT has made available. And today's prize will be handed out at the end of today's event. It's a $300 Amazon gift card, and we'll be making sure that we pick a winner and following up with you after today's event. As I mentioned, if you ask a great question, it could be worth $50. We want to make sure that we get lots of questions and we get everybody's questions answered. So if you ask a great question, we may choose it as today's winner, and we'll reach out to you after today's event with information on how to collect your $50 gift card. As always, winners must adhere to Actual Tech Media's prize terms and conditions, which are on the Handouts tab in your console. We have a couple of great speakers today. We have Patrick Harr, who is the Chief Executive Officer with SlashNEXT, and Atif Mushtaq, who is the Founder and Chief Product Officer with SlashNEXT. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, great to be here again.
Thanks for having us.
So we're going to start with a title slide that talks about what we're going to be talking about in today's event, breaking the multi-factor authentication myth. And before we get into a broader discussion about breaking some of the myths, it's probably important to talk about what it is and why multi-factor authentication is important. So do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, great. Again, great to be here with everyone. Obviously, we've all dealt with multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, and it's becoming much more common, not only in the business life, but even on the personal life. Everyone, you can actually go to the next slide. We have a little bit of examples. So you've heard of this as two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. At its core, you're effectively doing a login password, and then you're getting challenged for that, also for that password. So, example, everyone's you go in to sign up for a new site, and then they send you a code. You put that code in, and that becomes, quote, a two-factor that you're dealing with. Obviously, different ways to do that. But again, it's becoming much more common to effectively not only put your username and password in, but also provide that secondary credential or that effectively that challenge. Now, in many respects, what we've seen in the industry, particularly with the rise of identity management services like Okta, OneLogin, et cetera, is they're using that as a way to effectively provide, quote, this multi-factor authentication or identity management. Now, as we've seen as well, in many respects, particularly as it relates to what I would characterize human hacking, what I mean by that is phishing, social engineering attacks, rogue software attacks that lead to, it's a browser extension that leads to malware or ransomware. You could have SMS or what's called smishing attacks. All these are forms of human attacks. And as Gartner will tell you, 95% of all the evil out there in the world, these external successful attacks start with a human attack. So what are the practices, if you move to the next slide? This is actually a survey that was done with how security administrators believe that they could somewhat stop these phishing attacks, these social engineering attacks that lead to the downstream evil that I talked about. And that downstream evil, again, is ransomware, malware, data exfiltration, financial fraud. So one of the best practices people are implementing now is two-factor authentication with this notion that they believe they can stop these upstream human attacks. I think what we're really here to say, based off of it, we have a very extensive lab. We're continually looking at billions of transactions out there in the wild and continually seeing not only the implementation of two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication Again, whether that be from coming through your phone as a challenge, or whether that be coming through email or some other challenge mechanism. It can even be tokens, right, or biometrics as a secondary authentication method. We are now seeing the bad actors get beyond those that protection. And so I guess, as I've said over and over again in these Phish stories, a good defense is a layered defense. And so what we really want to talk about now is what we are seeing in our labs and our detection engines, and how the bad actors are evading two-factor, multi-factor authentication. So I guess the net here, be cautious. Don't think that anything is foolproof. It is a good step to put multi-factor authentication in place, but also be conscious that, again, these bad actors are always looking for the next thing that they could do to evade these techniques that everyone are putting in place. Again, I'd find no better expert out here to actually, that's why we invited Atif on to talk. Atif came out of FireEye, kind of, he really is, if I put someone out there that developed the core malware sandbox, he's kind of credited for that significant research on being able to look at attacks coming from Iran, North Korea, many bad actors. So he's really been front and center in seeing these new attack vectors. And so it's probably a good time to have him talk about what we are seeing coming out of the labs and coming out of these type of attacks.
Yeah, so just to sum up what you said, multi-factor authentication is good, but it's not the end of the road from as far as security goes, and it's something that we have to do, but be mindful that it's not a perfect solution. Atif, do you want to pick up where how hackers are bypassing MFA, even as we try to get it implemented in our organizations?
Sure. I mean, Patrick, thanks for the introduction, right? So I have a couple of slides. In the first slide, I'm going to give you an overview of techniques that are available to bypass second factor or multi-factor authentication. And right after that, I'm going to show you a couple of examples for each attack. And these are real world examples. So these are not proof of concept. So you can see that people are actually exploiting that as part of spear phishing and in the wild attacks. So very first technique is what I would call man in the middle and reverse web proxy. And the flow of attack is like that. Attacker would send you a link to a phishing website, and this link can be sent through email, through SMS, or through any other communication medium, LinkedIn, for example. So once you click on that link, it would lead you to a phishing page, and most probably it will be a fake replica of a legitimate vendor. For the sake of argument, let's say that it's the Office 365 login page. So now just imagine that user has the second factor implemented. So in this particular case, the attacker knows that he cannot really use user and password. Even if it has the user and password, it's not going to be helpful anyway, right? So what it's going to do is that it's going to act like a reverse web proxy between that phishing page and the actual service. So for example, you enter your username password into the fake page, and you're not paying attention to the address bar. So the moment you enter username password, the web page is going to talk to the original service like Office 365 and going to send that username password to that backend service. And now when the original service gets the username password, it'll prompt for the second factor. And now the phishing page will be saying that we just sent you a second factor token. It was actually triggered by the backend service, not by the phishing page. So once you get the second factor, phishing page would be asking you to enter the code that you just received. You enter the code. So now the phishing website has the username, password, and second factor. And now it has all the three tokens to authenticate with the real service. So it's going to send all these tokens to the original 365 and authenticate. And during that process, you're going to get the authenticated session cookies. Now, whenever you're talking to a new website and you have the second factor enabled, it would ask for the second factor for the very first time. And after that, it remembers through session cookies. So you don't have to enter a second factor every time. So essentially in this process, it will let you authenticate with the original service. In that process, save the cookies, and now these session cookies can be copied by attackers, and he can copy them on his own computer. And now because the browser has the session cookie, it will never ask for the second factor, and now you can freely log in to the victim's account. And making things worse, it looks like a slightly complex process, but recently a couple of researchers actually launched for your educational purposes a toolkit that actually make it all fully automated. So you can go to the GitHub directory, download those tools, you have the video tutorials, and you certainly have something that can bypass second factor on the fly. And that's the scary part. It means that you don't have to be a tech wizard to create these attacks. You can simply reuse the work of some brilliant researchers. So now the again I'll show you the real example in the next slides. Now the second technique is what I would call uh, no, would
Okay.
you stay on the previous slide?
Yep.
Yeah. So thanks. So in this particular case, people are trying to attack you through malicious OAuth app. So now every cloud service, Office 365, Gmail, they allow you to grant certain access to third-party applications, right? Facebook does it, Office 365 does it, and it does it within a certain scope. So, and once you grant certain permission to that third party application can access your account through OAuth tokens, right? It's a pretty useful tool, right? If you have certain application download your profile or information. The downside is that the process of granting this permission is so straightforward that attackers are pretty much fooling you into granting permissions to malicious applications. So the flow of attack is like that. You got a phishing link, and this phishing link, remember, is pointing to the original vendor website. So if you are trained to see the URL in the address bar, you are talking to actually the original website. So, for example, you get a Microsoft 365 link, you click on that, it is asking you for the username and password. And once you enter the username and password, or even the second factor, and the Office 365 would ask you to give permission to this third party application. And now, if the phishing email is well crafted, you might feel that it's your admin is asking you for some kind of permission, right? And if you press OK, everything is done. It's that easy. With a single click of a button, you're granting a third party malicious application access to your account. And if you happen to be a high privileged user, I mean, the malicious app can actually fool you into granting permission to the whole Active Directory. And pretty much your whole account, whole company wide account is compromised. And we are seeing the real world examples where people are using it. Again, it's going against, and why these are successful, because your training guys are telling you check the URL. If the URL is legitimate, it's pretty safe. And now here's an attacker using the original website to actually abuse you, right? So now if you're trained to look into the URL, you're more likely to fall into these type of attacks. So your training can be used against you in these particular cases. And the third case is what I would call browser hijacker or malicious browser extensions. And now this is what I would call the most dangerous type of attacks, right? So in general, most of us are doing business within browser. We used to have desktop applications. Now it's a SaaS model, right? Pretty much we're doing everything within browser, right? So it means all the rich information is available within browser window, right? And now the problem is that all modern browsers, they offer browser extensions. And these browser extensions are plugins. So once gets installed, they pretty much have access same privilege as your browser. So whatever is being rendered within your browser, they have complete visibility onto that, right? So then what's really happening that you're getting phishing links through email or through advertisement that is asking you to download certain extension, and they're using pretty clever social engineering techniques, right? Disguised as the legitimate applications. And once these extensions are installed, they can steal session cookies, right? At the same time, they can scrape the browser canvas. So whatever you're typing in, they don't have to steal your credentials, right? For example, you log into your Office 365 email. These extensions will wait for you to completely log in, and now all the emails are visible within the browser DOM object, right? And all you have to do is to start scraping it. It's pretty easy. Few line of code would allow you to have full access to the browser canvas. And you must have heard recent news where Google Chrome blocked some fake ad blockers who were exactly doing that, right? And so this is one attack vector that people don't really talk about, but that is real threat, and we are seeing real examples of that. So can you go to the next slide and let me show you guys some real examples? Next slide. So here are some examples. These are the attack that we recently blocked, and these are the first attack I'm talking about. These are the man in the middle or reverse proxy cases. Again, you're talking to a phishing website that is at the back end talking to the original website, and whatever information you put it passes it to the original service, and whatever response you get from the original, it gets passed to this thing, right? And once everything is done, you got the session cookies, right? So pretty simple attack, and if you're using third-party tools, it's even easier. Next. So now, here's another example, right? I mean, this thing is usually spreading through advertisements. Suddenly, you're browsing to say, a legitimate website that is serving a malicious ad. There's going to be a pop-up, and something is asking you to update the Flash player, and in that process, it would actually install a headless Chrome extension. And once that Chrome extension is installed, pretty much whatever you're doing within the browser is exposed to the attackers. It can scrape information, and at the same time, it can download uh, JavaScript at runtime to achieve malicious stuff. And this is exactly the way there are fooling Google Chrome vetting process. So you must have heard that, okay, Chrome extensions are pretty secure because Google vet them, but there's a loophole in that. Google allows you to download JavaScript at runtime. So when you submit your extension to Google, you have a benign code which just have a download function. And now, once the extension is installed, the malicious JavaScript gets installed at runtime. So now the vetting part is already done, right? Google has already approved it, and the real payload is coming at the runtime. And that payload could be third-party JavaScripts or could be any backdoor. I mean, the sky is the limit. You are within that user's browser. So now, before I hand it over back to Patrick, I would like to add a couple of other things, right? While all of us are focusing on getting access to your email service, but there are many other ways you can compromise a human, right? This is not the only way. I mean, getting access to your email is one thing. At the same time, I mean, we are seeing SMS-based attacks where people are compelling people to talk over phone and phish them. At the same time, we are seeing the rogue software that can compromise your machine, right? So this is not the only way people can, attack you. I mean, there are multiple other ways where you don't even need to have a second factor, and you can still compromise user information. And at the same time, making things worse, uh, we are seeing more and more use of legitimate cloud services like Dropbox or SharePoint to spread these phishing links. And this is where we are seeing the email gateway, especially. They're really feeling. I mean, most of these have the Dropbox-like services whitelisted, and now you have a phishing page that is hosted on Dropbox or SharePoint, and there are more than 500 such sites that we are monitoring, and they simply let it go. You can't really block Dropbox, right? And this is where what things are really spreading. So here's one example of how the OAuth works. In this particular case, on the left side, it was a email that was saying that you need to update your Windows Defender, and you click on the link and you log in with Google, and now is asking you to grant permission to this so-called antivirus, right? And on the right side is the same page for Office 365. But again, all the web services, cloud services now support OAuth, including Facebook to LinkedIn and everyone. So, I mean, you can expect more and more phishing link actually not creating their own phishing site, but rather relying on actual service to grant permissions. And hence, you can have access to web APIs. Yeah. So, yeah, Patrick, would you like
Do
to
you
add
mind?
anything?
Can I bring forward a question from the audience real quick? This is a really good question. I think that
Sure.
speaks to what you just mentioned. This is from Ken, and he asks, can you talk about SIM hijacking? I've heard that no interaction with the user is required. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, SIM hijacking is another way, right? I mean, again, this is where people are trying to basically hijack the second factor, right? If you have the SIM replication problem, right? I mean, the code that so phishing page is going to ask you for the second factor, and the phishing code that you're going to get will receive by the attacker as well. So, but SIM hijacking is, I mean, it's relatively a complicated process. I think you need to be much more technical in that perspective. I think this man in the middle way is relatively an easier way. The reason is that you don't need access to the cellular related information, and you can download a simple tool from GitHub to achieve that. And it's again going to achieve the same process, right? Because you are prompting uh, original service to send email, send SMS to the user device and compiling that. But again, the SIM hijacking is pretty dangerous. I think it's dangerous for many other reasons, right? I mean, it can really tap into your conversation. So it is really scaring. It's beyond just second factor. It's much, much scary.
Somewhat to that point, Atif, again, we've talked about this in the past, and you mentioned it just a little bit ago. A lot of the training simulation aspects that are done out there teach people to look at legitimate domains. You want to talk about just what we're seeing from these hosted attacks in legitimate domains? As an example, just a little bit of just as an aside, we're continually looking at everything going on out there in the universe. We actually pointed out to Google that they had about 50,000 hosted attacks deep inside the domains. Again, do you want to comment a little bit about this and why just looking at domains is not good enough today?
Yeah, that's the reason. Again, that's part of your training, right? Training asks you to look into the domain, and they ask you to look for weird domains. And just imagine that a phishing page is hosted within SharePoint, right? So what you are seeing is the SharePoint.com or the Dropbox.com, and this is where your guards are down, because somehow your training is asking you that, okay, trust the domain and do not trust the domains that you don't know. And that's the reason that we are seeing more and more attacks. I mean, on one hand, they're fooling domain reputation based system, because your email gateway will let these highly reputed site go, won't block them. And at the same time, when a user clicks on them, they think that they're talking to legitimate services, and they have inherent trust on these services. They don't understand that these services offer access to third party. If I have a Dropbox account, I can put my malicious content there. But for a common user perspective, yeah, I mean, we are talking to Dropbox, and that's the scary part. And that people, they are trained to trust legitimate cloud services, and this is where the abuse is happening.
Yeah, I think to this point, again, it's somewhat of a philosophy. Don't trust anything. Now, I think this is, and I hate saying that because as we've talked here, we could show you many different examples of how they're bypassing two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. We talked about the SIM-based attacks, the man-in-the-middle attacks. It really is something that effectively, I said this long ago, you effectively have to fight machines with machines. And since humans are effectively the weakest link in any security process, or look at the backdoor attacks that occurred in Exchange, these all start effectively with some human process, human error, or human attack. And that's somewhat of a message here. While we can put some of these layers in place, again, do not trust it completely. There is a secondary aspect you want to look at, particularly with the fact, and again, I've talked about this in the past as well, these bad actors now have more tools available to them. Atif just talked about GitHub, right? You can go find anything on GitHub and different code patterns, different invasive techniques. You then combine that with automation and legitimate infrastructure, right? I can spin up something inside of Azure or Google or Amazon or pick your poison. I can spawn these attacks. I can correlate that with behavioral information coming off of LinkedIn, dark web, right? So I can get very specific and pointed to Atif. I know his whole background. I know who he works for, the whole reporting chain, who the investors are, right? So I can create these very targeted, specific attacks. It looks like it comes from legitimate infrastructure. I can add the two-factor authentication process into the place. But again, unless you're effectively fighting machines with machines and almost having thousands, hundreds of thousands of effectively data scientists continually looking at these to figure out, is it an attack or not? That's where I would say be careful. Don't trust anything really. It's somewhat trust, verify, 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 and then move forward as a particular aspect. And one final thing I would note here, just on an attack, this is really of recent that we've started seeing. Atif, if you want to comment how we're now seeing even these embedded attacks in like documents like PDFs, they're not even resolving externally. They're actually resolving locally to a C drive. So even though you've gone through two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, you actually have access to a PDF that was sent to you, has an HTML link, and lo and behold, it's not going externally, it's just going internally. The express intent there is to do
That's
it
right. I
from...
mean, we are seeing more and more HTML attachments, right? And so you get a link from Dropbox, right? And you there's a invoice.html, right? You download that, you install, I mean, you open it, and now a local phishing page is open, and now there's no user attached with it, it's a local path. So whatever user and password you enter will get passed through the form post, right? So if you have a Zscaler of the world, right? For example, look, I mean, there's no user involved for the phishing page, right? Just a callback information involved, right? So again, you know what? I mean, they're coming up with very innovative solution. I think the scariest part is that there are thousands and thousands of hacking groups, right? I personally believe that 90% of those are very stupid people. What they're doing is that 10% are creating very good phishing toolkits, and they're making job of a newbie so easy. So it means that if I'm a jobless guy, I don't have to learn software engineering. I can simply go to dark web and download some free kits, or I can buy something for $200. It means that the barrier to entry to become a fisher is so low nowadays, that is beyond imaginable, right? So what we are seeing is that now more and more people getting into this business. There's a lot of money there, and that is creating the velocity of attacks that most of the system are unable to handle. About 2 years ago, at SlashNEXT, we used to catch closer to 15,000 links, right? And now within a year or so, we are catching closer to 25 to 30,000 links. So what happened? What is happening is that there's so much automation out there. And just imagine that if the phishing volume is doubling every year, what's going to happen in the next 2 3 years is beyond imagine. So you need a, if velocity of the attack is so high, you need multiple defense. You can't simply rely on one attack, right? We are not perfect. We offer real-time blocking, but at the same time, you combine with other techniques, I think you can achieve almost 100% protection.
Should we move forward with our next, with how SlashNEXT helps?
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's any other questions we wanted to ask at this point.
There will be.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think you're going to talk to some of this. So let's go through your sort of how SlashNEXT helps, and then we can reiterate with some of the questions that people have been bringing forward.
Perfect. So again, as I said, as I was just saying here, really don't trust anything. Verify, verify, verify. And also, as I said at the outset, a good defense is a multi-layered defense. Obviously, companies have engaged and deployed multiple tools. But as we saw this past year, right, with the shift to remote working, remote learning, and also this notion of convergence of working at the same time as you're also playing, right? We're all go in and out of our work life, our play life, our consumer life. And with that, we're also working on the same device. And we go between LinkedIn to Gmail on the personal front to corporate email, over to Slack, over to Dropbox that we just talked about. We all have two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication across these different services. But then we've also got text coming at us at the same time. Bottom line, the canvas and what we just talked about is the surface area of these attackers being able to attack you, very, very sophisticated, and also do it across these different channels. We firmly believe, as I just said before, you need to fight machines with machines, and you need to have that multi-layered defense in place. So at its core, what we effectively offer to solve this problem is what we call a human hacking defense. And so what do I mean by human hacking, right? Human hacking is really, hey, how do I get you as an individual, right? Or attack you as an individual to get you to depart from your credentials, get you to install software. Obviously, Atif just showed some of that rogue browser software extension. Very scary stuff. But as you can imagine, I'll actually just My daughter was using my computer, unbeknownst to me, to do some schoolwork. She's 5th grade, install some browser extensions. Next thing you know, I had some of these weird things happening in the machine. So how do you guard against this? I believe you have to take a holistic approach, what it characterizes as a 360-degree approach to stopping these human attacks, right? Prevent these social engineering attacks, these phishing attacks, targeted spear phishing, smishing, account takeover, business email compromise, rogue software, which lays in ransomware and malware. The only way you can do this, again, is take a holistic approach. And so we do just that. Number one, you want to be able to do an assessment. What is your current state of environment, right? Look at exactly, so what's going on with your own data. I'm a big fan of not just people telling you on the security side that you have a problem. And we're not here to scare anyone at all. This is about, hey, this is real world stuff that we're seeing. So you want to take a baseline. What is getting through your current defenses? Because I will tell you, I've been in the business long enough to know a lot of the tools that are built today to stop these human attacks were done with 2 things. Number one, they look at signatures. And second, they use trusted domains. As we just pointed out, trusted domains, throw that away, because if you trust domains, you're going to get killed. There are so many more attacks coming out of Google that look like they come out of Microsoft or out of Google or Adobe or Dropbox. You pick your name of your trusted domain. That's where they're coming from. And that's the reason why we're a big fan of looking at that baseline, the assessment, get your current state, what's getting through the current environment. Second, you want to be able to do training, but do training smartly, not from the old way of doing training where I'm simulating attacks and effectively, in some respects, pissing your users off or your employees off because I'm trying to trick people. We know that doesn't work. And the reason why we know that doesn't work, none of us pay attention to computer-based training. Let's call a spade a spade. It's compliance-based. I just tried to click it through it, answer my 10 questions, so I passed the test. And lo and behold, we know that the same top 10 users or the same top 20 users always fail, right? It's because they're the click-happy folks. They just don't pay attention. We fervently believe in live-based reinforced training. So at the point you click on a malicious attack, let's block it, but let's also say what it was attempting to do. Hey, this attack was trying to steal your credentials so it could do X, Y, Z. So we do live reinforced training at the point of click, at the point of attack. That way we've seen a dramatic reduction in how people behave and interact with these different, these bad actors. Third, you want to be able to protect, right? You have to protect at the point of that attack. And there's really 2 ways that we're looking at this. Number one, because many more of these attacks are coming across this, again, converged device, right? Personal and work life, BYOD. You do need to protect yourself on device. Atif highlighted just one of those. I actually call this the gnarly attack. If you're not actually stopping that PDF that has an HTML page or a link in it that resolves locally, if you're not on device, you're never going to see that. It's never been seen in the wild. You have to have the ability to do a quick scan and block of that type of attack. I could add one other to mention here with TLS 1.3 end-to-end encryption as an example, a WhatsApp attack that's correlated with LinkedIn. You're never going to see that if it's encrypted. It has to be clear text. You look at that on the endpoint. So we have an endpoint protection both on the mobile side as well as on your browser to protect all these human hacking attacks. And then finally, no good defense comes without also being able to respond to something. Nothing is foolproof, so you do have to have the ability, if you do see something, to respond. So we have very strong incident response. That's effectively what we call our total human hacking defense service. Again, at its core, what we're designed, our mission in life is to stop human hacking. We believe if you stop these attacks, 95% of all the bad stuff, malware, ransomware, financial fraud, all begins with that human attack. If you can stop that up front, you prevent these things. You stop it at the core, or at the root, and you don't even have to focus on the symptoms anymore, right? So that's the kind of a net message of how we help. The second aspect, in which, if you could just move to the next slide, I mentioned this assessment. If nothing else, I leave you with this. I think it's always important to take that baseline, know exactly where you sit today. Don't be naive to what's going on in these attacks. So always do those health checks. There's a reason why people do pen testing. You do vulnerability testing. In this case, do an assessment in one channel and one channel only right now, which is email, which is it's still a very popular way to deliver these attacks. Do an assessment of what got through there. It's pretty eye-opening when you go in and people have put in a secure email gateway service or they use Microsoft Defender. It's pretty eye-opening if you see what gets through those defense layers. It's not uncommon. We see pretty sophisticated supply chain attacks. We'll see someone that came upstream as a vendor and got into the email chain and the communications have been open, and you start seeing financial transaction information that starts being shared. Or you could see, again, some of these rogue browser software extensions because it looks like it came from a support person that could also be correlated, by the way, with an SMS that said, hey, go change your password because someone compromised your account. Those are the type of things that just good to get that baseline. You're going to see who are the most abused users. And it's not uncommon that we'll see, as you can imagine, high-value users like CFOs, CEOs, people that have product information or IP. Those are the ones that are likely to be attacked, and you see the multitude of attacks. So we believe, again, take that baseline assessment. We do run this as a self-assessment. You can run it on your own environment. You'll see it's a very 1, 2, 3 process. Takes about 5 minutes, and you'll get a report, right? And then we can run through that with you and show you where you currently sit.
So there's something important in that middle window. We see, I see this as an O365 administrator a lot. There's permissions requested from an app, but how do you trust that box?
Yeah, so again, back to this point, don't trust anything. But in this case, you want to trust and verify, right? Or meaning verify what we're doing. So we obviously, for this particular assessment, there's 2 sides of the assessment. One is the Microsoft 365 assessment, looking at emails and communication effectively vector. So that process is you do with the OAuth token, put in your credentials. Now, the key thing here, it is trusted and verified. There's a checkbox from Microsoft, so you know it's legitimate, unlike some of the stuff we showed before where there's some missing components. And that's very important here. There's very, very slight derivations as to how folks are tricking, right? The bad actors are tricking. So one of the aspects here is the checkbox. We verify this against Microsoft as well in our own engines. So it's extremely secure to be able to input that, and it's a temporary password. I should note a couple other things here. We don't maintain data long term, right? Everything is encrypted in flight, so it's highly confidential. One thing we pride ourselves just at its core, privacy matters. And in fact, it goes so far as to say we guarantee privacy here, to say that's how important it is for us in terms of making sure that you can run this assessment securely.
So I would like to add on assessment that, all of this process happens in the memory, right? So while we are looking for the link, right, right after that, we don't even write it on the disk, right? So once the assessment is over, the container is just destroyed, and so nothing even gets written on the disk, right? So it's a completely memory-based process, right? Even our developers don't even have access to this information.
Yeah.
And the link I'd like to make sure the audience sees on this page is slashnext.com/request-a-demo, request-a-demo. That's critically important for people to want to be able to take a look at more, to get more information from SlashNext is one way. We have some questions from the audience. This is from Jason. He echoes trust nothing is the first part of his question. But he says, is there a recommended solution that doesn't need human interaction? This seems to be the most insecure point of entry. Hardware authentication is difficult to manage, etc. So basically, can we just get humans out of this?
Well, that's exactly what we are trying to do, right? I'm a huge fan. It's pretty amazing for me that, all of us are trying to automate humans, right? From automated cars to, and phishing is the only thing we putting the human race backwards. We're telling them to do it yourself, right? So what we are offering is pretty much automated solution, right? Our mission is to stop the phishing page before even user sees that. So we are actually work at the on click level, and so you don't even have to see the page, that you have to even go to the second factor stage. And that's exactly what we are doing. We are not precisely a training company. We are a pure prevention solution that will make sure that you never even see the attack. We block it before the user even set eye on that page.
Yeah, so this goes back to what I was saying. We take the philosophy you want to fight machines with machines, because you really look at these attackers, right? They're using these machine-based kits, right? That they're not really creating them, and they're spawning them not just in days and weeks. It's now hours and minutes. And Atif noted, right, we used to see about 25,000 daily attacks. Now it's 50,000. We expect that to continue to double. So there's just no way from a human perspective that you can stay ahead of this curve. And yet, if you think about it, on this side of the house, right, on the user side of the house, we're through training, through these other methods, we're trusting a human to stop this process. And it's simply not possible. Too much goes on in your daily life. And there's too many attack vectors now. We've mentioned email, but again, it is a lot of kids, I say kids now, but don't even use email as their trusted source. It's text, it's Discord,
Right.
it's Slack, it is many different other communication channels. So the last thing you ever want to do is think that as a user, I can train it out of them, or I can put some other people process component. You have to fight machines with machines. You want to automate that. You want to deliver. You want to make it as service. So there's no thinking involved. It just happens, and it's prevented before it actually infects. And I believe if you do that, you prevent many of the downstream errors that occur, as opposed to trying to go focus on the symptoms of the upstream problem. And at its core, our philosophy is, can we stop 95% of these successful attacks at its core by doing machine-based prevention, right, as opposed to human prevention, and automating that process.
Just a note for the audience, we've put up a poll question for you. We're going to answer some more of your questions, but we have a question for you. What additional information would you like about SlashNEXT? Starting with their free risk assessment for Microsoft 365, data sheet, and a number of other items. So, I think I'm going to suspect I know the answer to this next question, but it was marked as high priority, so I want to make sure that we bring it forward. But it's just like phish testing. We test our users with fake MFA requests. How often do you suggest testing users, and what else can we be doing to improve user awareness, knowing that humans are the weak link?
So I'll comment on this, and I'll comment on this, and certainly Atif can to pick up here. We just talked about this in many respects. Implement a machine-based prevention process. Don't rely on training. Training is an augmentation aspect, right? And as I noted, training you want to reinforce at the point of an interaction with an attack. We all know when you're preparing to do a talk, right? There's one thing when you're delivering a quote fake talk versus actually doing it live. You somehow pay more attention when you're live and in the game and in the process. And so we believe in that live reinforced training, because when we do that, people pay attention. And then you see it, and it's statistically proven here, where you see a significant deceleration in their participation in these attacks moving forward. But when you're doing a simulated attack, people know it's bullshit. And they know, and because they're pretty easy to detect. Yes, I know some of the administrators out there like to get, in some of these tools, they like to get pretty foolhardy. I know one particular attack, they played off of a bonus, and that's how they got people to participate. That had a little bit of an employee blowback. Second, did it really prevent those people from clicking on it the next time? No. And that's the reason why in all those training simulations, you will see the top 10 users will be the top 10 users throughout the year. And so do live reinforced training. and rely on machines to prevent the attacks before they actually happen. So take that multi-layered defense approach. So Atif, I don't know if you want to build off that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think training is tough. I mean, I think there are reasonable training courses available for email perspective, right? But now you're talking about other communication medium. How many courses are there to spot SMS phishing or LinkedIn-based phishing, right? I think the problem is that, I mean, there's so much information that we have to go through each day. I mean, we have stopped paying attention. We simply, there's so much information flow, right? And
Yeah.
now, even if you don't even have the training courses for other communication medium, how to spot phishing within WhatsApp, right? You're just helping the email cause, right? And to be really frank, with self-phishing IR, humans have a false positive rate of closer to 90%, right? So not only they have the false negative part, they're actually bombarding their IT team with fake email. So what with legitimate email. So what happens that 90% of the time you engage your IT guy, hey, I got a phishing, and the IT guy says, hey, it's not a phishing, right? So what's going to happen that after a certain time you'll say, okay, I get embarrassed every time I report a benign email. I need to stop clicking. So again, it's a reverse effect of training. You scare them too much that they start reporting benign. Admins push back and say, okay, are you crazy? These are the benign one. And this is where you come into a situation where you say, okay, I have to engage these guys, and phishing attack is successful. So humans
This
are
is actually
confused between admin and company.
this is a great point. We've actually seen companies have to hire more, not less, because of some of the training, right? So people become so ultra scared because they
Right.
actually get fined. They get fines, they get reported, they get some, the bad list. No one wants to be shamed, so they
Right.
overly report. And then you have to dedicate a SOC administrator to do nothing but go through all this stuff, these which are actually real emails or real communications.
Patrick, your example used earlier about the one where the company used a bonus as the phishing lure, I read about that, and it was absolutely pretty abhorrent. I mean, it turned people off from the whole phishing program in general, for good reason, because they basically baited people with with something that was tied to their paycheck. So it was effective, but not in an employee morale sort of way. So yeah, there's a lot out there. Now that's all of the questions that we have from the audience right now. Gentlemen, thank you very much for this fantastic presentation. Is there anything else you want to say before we end today's event?
Yeah, and I'll just close with that. Hey, fight machines with machines, right? Don't trust, but fight machines with machines, right? And again, there is a absolutely very strong positive things you can implement here to be able to defend. But do pay attention to this. It's much like taking vitamins. A lot of people don't take vitamins for the prevention cause, and then they deal with the downstream whatever physical effects that we all go through. Prevent these things upstream, and your life's going to be a hell of a lot simpler.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you very much for this great discussion. We're going to be giving away a $300 Amazon gift card to a lucky winner. Our winner today is Manish Sharma from Washington. Manish will be reaching out to you after today's event. And as always, thank you to our sponsor, and thank you to our guests today. And also thank you to our audience. Please, everyone, have a safe and hopefully somewhat sane rest of your day.